Hi, and welcome to another episode of Digital Dexterity. I'm Wes McChristian. Today, I'm joined by a good friend and special guest, Josh. Josh, do you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Josh Cospoon, Kentico technical lead in the Kentico practice. Been with American Eagle about 18 years now.
And you and I have been partners in crime for 12 years.
I was gonna say a decade at least.
Yeah, right. Predating our partnership in what we now know the Kentico practice to be. You and I also worked together in what we called our inside sales department. Would you mind just giving our listeners a quick rundown on kind of like what's the day in the life of Josh look like?
Lots of emails, right? Day in the life. Yeah, I think it's mostly just making sure the team has what they have to get projects done, right? A lot of teams scattered all over the place. So
ultimately, you're a developer by trade.
Yes.
Right. And so I think this is maybe a good segue into the topic today, which is something that we're finding just critically important to the industry, but also to all of our client roster utilizing Kentico. And this is the notion of migration. And I think we'll dive in for our listeners into kind of how we define some of these terms. And we think it's naturally technical, hence your participation in the conversation today, but incredibly important for business users to listen through as well. So one thing that I think is important as we break into the topic of migration, next generation of evolution of the content management system specific to a business application or web property, is really the history of .NET, right? Kentico itself is a .NET application. It's a piece of software.
It is.
Utilizing .NET as a language to prop it up. So, as a developer by trade, can we maybe start by walking through that layer? Because it's often an unseen part of the decisions that are impacting software development and software progression.
Yeah, back in the day, it was a web forms, portal engine, .NET framework.
Right.
And it grew into, .NET Core eventually, MVC model.
Right.
Which .NET Core is what it runs on today.
Yeah. And I think like for members of the community, I've seen some great content from like Brian McKeever at BizStream. I know Becky Dilworth at Blue Modus has some good content to support this as well. But the spirit of the discussion here is that while we engage with Kentico and the application, a lot of the impacts that we're seeing there are being driven by Microsoft. And as you just kind of explained, the shift through various, I call them dialects, but that's not a technical term. I'm a business user. I'm a marketer at the end of the day. As these dialects have changed shape, right? And that represents a material impact on the way that we're able to support these sites.
Right.
And so why is it important to consider all of these dimensions when thinking about migration, when thinking about the next generation or the evolution of your site? I think you and I came up with a few items in our prep. First, application integrity. This is important for from a quality perspective, from a security perspective, to make sure that frameworks are up to date and the integrity of the application is operating as we intend it, and keeping out bad actors, that sort of thing.
Right. Also, performance.
Great.
Too.
Yep.
Making sure that your application runs in a good speed, right? .NET framework eventually got a little bit heavy.
Yep.
And applications started running really slow.
Right.
But the introduction of MVC
yep.
made things run a little bit quicker. And then obviously .NET Core definitely improved performance.
I mean, we obviously work with a lot of technology, but like some of the sites we launch on Kentico, I'm just floored by how fast they are.
It's crazy how fast some of them are nowadays.
Especially with the at least the modern Experience by Kentico tool set. It's just, they're some of the most performant sites that we launch. And as an agency, we're launching about a site a day. So, I mean, that's cool to see. Next on the list, talent.
Yes.
This is they're not teaching ASP.NET in college anymore and universities. That was a big one you and I talked about as well.
Right. It's harder to find .NET framework programmers nowadays. So trying to support that old technology, it makes it important to, migrate and bring it to a new modern technology that all the developer or new programmers and coming out of college know.
Yeah. And then I think the last one on our list here, just as we were like kind of unpacking, like, why is it important to stay up with all the .NET changes is, and we touched on a little bit already, this notion of security, right? Microsoft has published security and support windows for technology, and Kentico as a application that powers an individual website. We want to make sure we stay inside of those support windows.
Yeah, Microsoft is releasing security updates routinely. And, as those updates come out, things change, and Kentico also releases their updates along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, if we think about Kentico then as this application powered by .NET as a sort of this abstract idea, right? Like, this is a piece of software. For Kentico, this is their 21st year in business. They celebrated their 20th anniversary last summer. It's all built on .NET tech and specific for business users, but some of the things that we're talking about are, heavily technical in nature. And I think legacy clients that found a home on Kentico pre-version 12, which would have been, 5 years ago now?
Yeah, at least 5 years.
That's all legacy tech outside of support, both from a Microsoft perspective, from a Kentico perspective. And that introduced the MVC option or flavor of Kentico.
Right.
And what we now have in Experience by Kentico is really latest and greatest .NET 9 application. And we still have, I'm having conversations every day about what does the next generation of my site look like? How to get from MVC, or the legacy portal engine, as Kentico called it, into the latest and greatest that Kentico has to offer. And so we know Kentico has authored what they call a migration toolkit. Comes in a couple different flavors, that connects to a couple different sources of data. There's even a universal connection. You've done quite a bit of R&D on the migration toolkit with the team to research and pressure test this migration toolkit, right? Because as we've sort of talked about this, the foundation of Microsoft, it's not just a button press.
Right.
And so, talk to us a little bit about what does the migration toolkit do?
Well, it's a .NET application. It's a CLI. So it runs like at a command prompt, right? But ultimately what it does is it migrates your content in simple terms. It'll migrate your page types, your pages, forms, users, all the content you would expect to be moved, right?
Right.
So it's a CLI, so you can make changes to it. And, along the way, as you're testing it, if you see something that you don't like, you can go back, make changes, and rerun it again.
Right.
Ultimately, you're migrating all your content into XPK. And hopefully, you don't have any issues along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the migration toolkit is nice because Kentico considers a feature. So they're constantly tuning it. And, just like any good piece of software, it has some bugs and they fix those bugs.
They do. It's under the 7-day bug fix policy,
which is a great call out. And then what you're describing is like this iterative nature of migrating content.
Yes.
Right. These websites or web properties, at the end of the day, they're unique business applications. I think it's, as much as I would love it just to be a button press.
Yeah.
Right. It's unreasonable to believe that, something with such a critical impact to our business, like a web property, can just be moved in that way.
Right.
And so as part of this migration, I think it's probably worth talking about maybe some definitions, some operational definitions, right? And you and I were even just talking about this morning, right? And the scale of scope for the evolution of a web property, right, that represents our business. We use words like migration to represent we're like physically moving data from one property to a next. And this migration toolkit helps us do that. It helps us facilitate that. And folks that are already on Kentico have equity in that process because they pay a license fee. And Kentico uses that license fee to power the operational expense of investing in features like this. But then there's also upgrade, minor version upgrade, which is like
hot fixes,
security vulnerabilities. There's a release weekly, right? This is on a scale of hours in terms of implementation. But then on the sliding scale, or on the far end of the sliding scale, we'll also use words like rebuild and build. So build being like a net new property.
Starting from scratch.
You got it. And then rebuild being, okay, you have something today, but we're building you an experience by Kentico next. And maybe that includes some components of migration.
Yes.
And I think our listeners for a session like this are probably some folks that are evaluating Kentico and they fall into that build, rebuild category. But we also have some listeners that are probably existing Kentico clients, experienced by Kentico or otherwise, and may be on earlier versions of Kentico as a software application. So we can talk about either rebuild or migration. And one of the important considerations is notion of feature parity.
Right.
And I believe Kentico has made some differences, built some differences into the software intentionally.
For a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good thing. It's as evolution is progress. Talk to us a little bit about your experience with a migration toolkit and navigating some of those differences and what listeners should expect.
Yeah, I think the important thing is to plan where your content's going.
Yes.
Right. So,
yep.
In previous versions, for example, you might have like a carousel.
Yep.
That shows images in a slide, right? Fashion.
Right.
And the configuration for that carousel may be housed in like a page type in the content tree. In the new version, right? That kind of stuff, the configuration tiles for the carousel would probably be better suited in like the Content Hub, right? So when you're running the migration, right, you can move all your pages over and those will come over as, content only items on XBK. But ultimately you would want to move those to the Content Hub. But, Kentico gives you the ability to, map those to the Content Hub instead.
To make a choice.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of effort there while you're planning. So it's really important to understand where your content is going.
Yep.
So you can make those decisions in the code when you're migrating the content.
And so, I mean, this use case you're talking about is Kentico to Kentico.
Yep.
Right. It's like you have an existing Kentico site today. You want to move into Experience by Kentico and harvest the value of new features like the Content Hub, right? Just to state it explicitly, folks that are in 13 don't have that today. That's a new piece of amazing functionality present inside of Experience by Kentico. And the toolkit gives us the choice. How do we structure our data? Where does it go?
Right.
Do we preserve it inside of the historic page tree or now make use of this amazing piece of functionality?
Exactly. And then, if you're migrating those widgets over too, that would traditionally point to a path in the content tree. You can customize the migration toolkit to also change the option in the widget on XBK to point to the Content Hub.
That's a great point because, even with new additions to the Content Hub like taxonomy and smart folders, this helps with, and I think I even talked to Sean Wright, evangelist over at Kentico on an episode not too long ago, just about the power of that functionality and how you reuse it inside of some of those widgets that you're describing. Because that Content Hub really does unlock the notion of like reuse.
Yes.
One single point of content in the hub, which used to be the tree, and then, wherever that widget's placed, it's now referenced, if you will, through that Content Hub.
Yep. And then you can reuse it anywhere on the site.
Yep. You got it. So, I mean, it's incredibly important to talk about migrating the data, right? This is kind of what we're talking about with the Content Hub, but also the experience. And we've seen some architectural changes in Kentico throughout the years. I mean, talk to us a little bit about migrating the presentation layer as well.
Yeah. I mean, Kentico 13, you use .NET Core to write the front end, right? And you use the same technology in XBK. So a lot of the framework can be reused. You basically just reuse the same application. Some of the queries may need to be updated, to get the content out of the database, right?
Yep.
Because with XPK, the web content is structured a little bit differently. But basically, you're just rewriting the data transfer layer. So
Yeah, great. So like from our like operational definitions of scope, like we're sort of, it's not a button press, but it's
No.
not a rebuild, right? There's efficiencies.
It's in the middle.
Exactly. There's efficiencies there because Kentico's still Kentico, but the technology, right, as we sort of explored with Microsoft, is now more current, more modern, and that type of update is a natural piece of the project.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, we've got a couple projects in motion right now where, folks have approached us and said, "Hey, is it the right choice for us to rebuild? Is it the right choice for us to migrate?" And unfortunately, I don't know. I think you'd agree. I don't think there's one single answer to that, right?
I don't think so either.
Because the migration toolkit as a feature does a great job of moving well-structured content. And in Kentico 13, it also does a good job of moving widget
content.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Which are like two really primary ways to manage content. But anybody in Portal Engine, still, I think there's a business decision to be made there. There is a migration pathway, but it's multi-step in nature.
It is. In Portal Engine, the unstructured content is very unstructured. It's difficult to parse through. One of the biggest things is you probably want to refactor a lot of that content into a more structured way.
Yep.
And that's why, we point to rebuilding some of that. Not to say that you couldn't use the migration toolkit to bring over the structured stuff, right?
Yep.
But you'd still be doing a lot of reworking around structuring the content that's unstructured and fits the model of the XPK data structure.
And there's some evaluation there on whether or not that content is even still relevant, likely stale,
right?
In a scenario like this. So, so there's a decision to be made there, a business decision to be made. Do we migrate or do we shift our operational definition? We move more towards a build or rebuild style project where eliminating that technical debt and starting over,
extracting what you can from it.
I was just going to say the same thing. Exactly. Right. Like there's still structured content you can move, but it doesn't have to be a full 1-for-1 migration.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Great. I love the call out about planning too, right? Because all of these decisions come from a strong planning effort, a strong definition effort of, what is the outcome that's intended? Because I think you and I have found that some of these are technical projects.
Very much so.
But they can be business projects as well. So far, I think we've done a lot of our discussion or exploration in constrained to the Kentico ecosystem. I think there's a lot of people that are evaluating the next generation of their content management system, and maybe they're not on Kentico today and they're considering it. So Kentico has what they refer to as the universal migration toolkit, which is this framework where they don't really care what the source of the data is. It's a framework to
it's an extension of the
exactly.
Tool.
Subset or of the migration toolkit, right? Where they don't really care what the source is, but as a framework, it's meant to bend and shift data from wherever it's coming from into a mold that Experience by Kentico can ingest. Talk to us a little bit about the universal side of the migration toolkit.
Yeah, like I said, it's an extension of the Kentico toolkit. It's a separate piece of code, but within their repo, to use it, you tap into events that they provide, right? So
sure. As
you're migrating content over to web, XPK, you can write an event to say, go out to this API and get data, for example. I had actually recently used it to migrate content out of WordPress. I migrated news articles out of a WordPress site into XPK which, really helped moving that content out. We're also able to extract like the SEO data and all that from WordPress.
Which is great. I mean, was it these articles, was it articles you said?
Yep.
Were these well-structured articles?
For the most part. Within the call, you do massage the data a little bit if you need to.
Sure.
But ultimately, you're creating the objects that need to go into XPK.
Which is, I mean, that's a really practical use case. We do that all the time. Not just articles, but like, I don't know, I feel like blogs from WordPress is a pretty common candidate for structured data migration that we see efficiencies with now using the Universal Migration Toolkit. And the neat part is it's like we sort of decompose it by page type, right? Or what we would call page type,
right?
Or content type.
Content item.
Yeah, exactly. Where we're going to sort of do this anatomical analysis of the page types, the content types, create a greater content model. And then ultimately, as you stated earlier, we get a choice of like, do we put this in the page tree? Do we put it in the content hub? And that provides a rich editor experience for the folks that are going to be engaging with this content from the back end.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Well, excellent. Josh, thanks so much for joining us today. I think
Absolutely.
this is a great conversation. It's something I feel like I'm talking to end users about every single day. So I love that we kind of angle this towards a kind of a more technical mindset, because it's a really important conceptually, and I think it's something Kentico's spent a lot of time investing in, really to minimize any friction for anybody that's still on any of that portal engine tech or a Kentico Experience 13. Helps make the shift to Experience by Kentico a little bit more seamless. So thanks for joining us for the conversation.
Of course, good conversation.
And to all our listeners, thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode.